broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me okay. We have started the webinar. If anybody cannot hear me, hopefully we'll get some questions being raised and we can address that. Good afternoon. You're listening to Ryan Thomas from Timlin Enterprises, based out of the Boston area, Massachusetts. Very much appreciate everybody taking the time to be here today. We will try to make the best of it. And you are here just to make sure you're in the right spot to listen to us talk about some steps you can take to start protecting your private information in Office 365. And I have with me, once I move to the following slide here, some experts in the field from both Metalogix and Nintex. And before I introduce them, I'll just give you sort of a quick intro of myself. I'm a long-term SharePoint user architect, and I now have a company that specializes in helping people make the most use out of these platforms. And I will leave it at that. I think a lot of people on here probably know me based on the attendee list, so I won't do too much into there. But also I'd like to introduce, first of all, the other Ryan on the webinar, Ryan Patrick Tully, who's the Director of Product Management at Metalogix. Ryan, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Just like Ryan, I also hail from the Boston, Mass area, from Metalogix, and I specialize in SharePoint development and SharePoint design of products that fit within the security and information governance space, covering SharePoint, Office 365, and all the goodies involved, like groups and OneDrive for Business, all of that fun that you'd expect.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Vadim Tabakman, and you can correct me if I butchered that, Vadim, but technical evangelism guy at Nintex.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So yeah, my name is Vadim Tabakman. I run the technical evangelism team here at Nintex for the Americas. Basically, where I sort of stem from is I have a long background in software development. Actually, started as one of the developers at Nintex, building out Nintex workflow and business process automation tools. And all the guys in my team, guys and girls, do a bunch of presenting at events. If you guys go to SharePoint events, you'll probably see at least one of my guys there either presenting or being a booth babe. So hopefully be able to cover some of the business process automation around security and protecting your data today.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Vadim. Okay, real quick before we jump to our agenda, we did this because we want to get some information out there. We want to get some people thinking about how they can, I wouldn't necessarily use the word secure Office 365, but start thinking about it from the data perspective, data governance, data management, data loss prevention, some of the tools that you have at your fingertips, and some of the things you need to do to get started. It's an overwhelming topic to a lot of people. A lot of people aren't even sure about laws and regulations, so we're hoping to get the juices flowing on this. It's not a recipe because there's no single sort of meal that everybody likes, but you have some people on the phone that have done a lot of this type of work before, and hopefully you'll get some information out of it, and you can ask some questions and obviously do some follow-ups afterwards as well. All right, Vadim or Ryan, do you guys want to add anything to that? Anything additional that you hope people get out of this that I didn't cover?
I'll actually just add a little bit. I'd love to make sure that everybody is aware of all the tools that are out there, especially from the guys that we have on the call today, around what they can do to mitigate some of those potential risks that they encounter. So, once you guys have a good kind of understanding of what we're talking about, make sure you ask any questions you guys have, so we'll be able to tackle those either as we go, if it makes sense, or at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, awesome.
And to echo Vadim on that one too, I mean, we know that there are challenges out there right now around sensitive information that exists in platforms that are Office 365, or maybe there are other collaboration platforms that people are using in the cloud. They have SharePoint on-prem, whatever it happens to be. And I know Office 365 is our target for today. But we know that there are always challenges around there around identifying that information and securing that information and making sure that they have everything in place to comply with whatever internal policies they have, plus any external regulatory compliance needs that are out there. So we want to make sure that when everybody leaves here, they're at least very comfortable with the concept of, hey, listen, I know what I need to do going forward to make sure that I can comply with what I need to either internally or externally, or even sit back and say, hey, I didn't even consider that from an internal regulatory perspective. And this is what I'm going to take back to my team and sit down and say, this is what I'm going to do, right? Whether we talk about what you can do out of the box or what you can do by working with the people that are on this call right here, at least have some sort of plan going forward or the ideas of a plan.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ryan. And just from my perspective, as on the service end of this, we're getting a lot of requests from our customer base that they want to get a handle on this, and a lot of them don't know how. So I thought this was a really good idea to get the right group of people together to kind of give people the get started plan. I mean, just one potential customer last week we talked to got hit by crypto virus. So we'd been talking to them for a while, and now all of a sudden they're in damage control mode, and the project that wasn't super important before is now super important, even though it's in some ways it's too late. So hopefully the people on the phone might want to think about that and get ahead of it. Okay, I think that's good. All right. So, we're not going to hit you with statistics. There's maybe just 2 slides on this, but I think most people know the scope already. But just take a look at this slide and look at some of the sheer magnitude of what happens to people's data. And you guys all, I mean, half the people in the country, me one of them, got hit with Equifax, and that was a real hassle to the point where my credit is now frozen, and Equifax bombed halfway through, so I didn't get a PIN number. So now I'm kind of like stuck trying to get it back. These are the kind of things that make me never want to do business with a company like that again. So there's a whole bunch of potential damage that can occur if you don't take some steps to try to prevent this. And so I think we've probably all heard about some of these elements in the news or been personally affected, and it's preventable, or at least when incidents occur, there are things you can do to manage them, and that's really what we're going to try to get going today. Ryan or Vadim, anything you guys want to add to this?
Nothing from me.
All right.
No, nothing. I think you laid it up very nicely.
All right. I know. Not too excited to talk about stats. Okay. Again, won't harp on this one either. Just want you guys to get a feel for size and scope, number of people reporting information back about what they're doing with their data, what they know, what they don't know. A couple of the ones stand out to me are, most people use proprietary information with their jobs. This kind of goes without saying. I mean, we all have stuff that's IP or PII or whatever that has to do with company data, but it's pervasive, right? It's vast. It's just keep in mind that a lot of this data is just kind of willy-nilly spread around and on USB sticks and file shares and things like that. And the biggest one, so sort of upper left and lower right, 70% of attacks hit small businesses. And I don't know if that's because they're easier, they feel like they're less secure. That's probably my guess, but I'm not sure of. But keep in mind that it's not just people trying to steal the secrets from IBM or Microsoft. A lot of people see vulnerabilities in small businesses and go after them. Any of you guys have any thoughts on this? Are you guys good?
Yeah, go for it. Right?
Oh no, please, Vadim, please.
I was going to say this is a big one for me, because I think that a lot of this is really scary. Some of it is going to be affecting the companies you work at, but also your personal lives as well. Whether it's data that you put in at work and you want that to be secure, whether it's whether you work from home and you're putting some data in and you want your work environment at home to be secure as well. So I just want everyone to be kind of prudent and keep an eye out on potential risks that are out there. You hear stuff on the news, something like the Equifax was a big one that everybody heard about, but there's also other things that people hear about. Make sure that your colleagues know about it. Sometimes things fall through the cracks and they don't hear about it. Make sure everybody's aware of some of the risks that are out there as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One of the reasons we really don't like showing slides that sit back, or at least drilling into the specific metrics, is looking at things like this is scary. This is terrifying to look back and go, oh my goodness gracious, how absolutely vulnerable must I be at any given time, right? That's not what we're trying to do in any stretch of the imagination, and we don't want anybody to take a look at this and say that sharing information is now the scariest thing in the world, because if I give anybody a file at any given time, suddenly they're in trouble. Right? That file's going out on the internet. Somebody's looking at it over here that's not supposed to have that. But this is a really good informative step to point out most people are really not in the space that they think that they are for what it comes down from a security perspective. They may actually be in a spot where they're not fully prepared, but we want to make sure that we get you as fully prepared as possible, specifically when we start talking about the collaboration platforms today.
All right, thanks, guys. And the trend is don't prepare in advance. It's wait until something bad happens and then try to figure it out later. And I think this is one of those issues where it is best to get in front of it beforehand. All right. All right, this one I would like Ryan Patritelli to handle, because this is his baby.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you, Ryan. So the Ponemon Institute. I hope a lot of you guys out on the phone have heard this before, but if you haven't, the Ponemon Institute is a great third-party institute that does independent research on privacy, data protection, information security policies out there, as well as consulting services around that. And no, this is not a pitch for Ponemon. This is pointing out that we did work with them a few months ago to generate a study that sat back and said, let's take a look at information security within a variety of different platforms, a variety of different storage mediums for retaining this type of information. And let's actually target that very specifically on SharePoint. Now, we'll have a few different statistics that we pull back from the Ponemon research study that came out that you'll see later on in this presentation as well. But the staggering response that we got out of this, the part that was really concerning, so to speak, right, is that people are really not taking the steps that are necessary to be prepared within their collaboration environments for what potential breaches or potential security challenges there may be out there around identifying your sensitive information, your confidential information, in a variety of different ways. And again, we'll drill into that as we continue on. But I do want to point out that the areas that they looked at here were not specifically, hey, do I have a product in place, right? Am I going ahead and am I searching specifically on this every single day in this collaboration environment? But it focused on, do I have a plan on paper? Do I understand what my governance strategy is around sensitive information? And realistically, do I actually have a definition internally on what sensitive and confidential information actually looks like, right? And then once I've identified that information, what is my process? Sorry, identified that definition. What's my process for identifying that information in my platform? And then once I've done that, what's my process for making sure that I have a level of security that fits around where my governance plan is around that type of information? So when you start drilling on that outside of the traditional collaboration perspective, they looked specifically into the SharePoint environment and found out that 79% of respondents said that they don't have the right tools in place that can actually support the control, the identification, and the monitoring of these sensitive assets within their SharePoint environment. And this extends not just to SharePoint from an on-premise perspective, but SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and the overall Office 365 point of view. So part of this is they focused on a lot of the different areas that we also know from our experience over at Timlin, Nintex, and Metalogix, that these are what you really have to look at for the management of your sensitive information. And as a result, you're going to see that these areas that Ponemon studied, as well as some others, are going to be the ones that we start talking to you about a little bit further on in this webinar here about what you can do to really control that information in your environments.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And what I find interesting here is that you have to go through the exercise to understand what it is that you need to then figure out that, oh, 8 out of 10 people don't have that, right? So these people are even ahead of the game because they actually did an audit and they looked and they figured out what it is they needed to then figure out what they didn't have. So I think a lot of people aren't even at that stage yet. They haven't even started looking. All right, thanks. All right, so just a quick synopsis here on, and there's a lot of potential impacts, right? But what can happen in the event of a data privacy breach, right? You can let out your names, addresses, social security numbers. Obviously, your brand can be irreparably damaged. You can be sued, and that whole concept is costly both from a time, monetary, but more important, anybody that's been in business and had some bad things happen to them, it's almost like a stifling event. When something occupies your time, you really can't focus on keeping your business going forward. You're kind of busy doing damage control and working on those elements. So, the idea is to try to prevent the damage before it happens.
Yeah, Ryan, day to day, I've been kind of talking with our customers, potential customers, partners around customer data. And one of the things that I actually really like, as much as this is a very time consuming as part of my role, but a lot of the questions that I get are around how secure is the data? How do we prevent customer data from going out there somewhere where it shouldn't go and things like that. And of course, we always talk about best practices. This is what what are you trying to do? One of the things that some of our customers want to do is report on some of the data in one of the systems. Say it's Office 365, they have some processes running, they want to capture information, they want to report it, they want to use some of the cloud tools that are out there, whether it's something like one of the BI tools or something like that, and then we'll start building out some really cool dashboards. One of the things that I always make sure that they're aware of is think about the type of reports that you want to do. You might want to report on all the customers that are coming in, asking questions and things like that. You want to see in dashboards. Okay, makes sense. But what you don't really need to send up to, outside your secure system is to send out things like maybe, the actual name of the customer or their social security number or bank details or anything like that. That's not the information you need to report on. You want to report on the statistical information. So make sure you grab the data that you need and you want to report on it. But do a lot of kind of work beforehand, before you start building that stuff out, before you start sending out data that you don't need to. Oh, let's have all the data there because maybe one day we'll need to report on it. Don't think of it that way. Think of it at the very beginning of saying, here are some pieces of information that is secure. This is not meant to go outside the business or the business firewall. Everything else that we want to report on, okay, send the statistics out there, start building out your dashboards. That's the things that I actually see a lot of every day, people asking me those sorts of questions. And so I do a lot of like RFPs, RFQs, all that sort of stuff, where that's starting to become a very important part of those. How do you secure that data? How do you make sure that our users don't send data out there that they shouldn't? So it's good to see that people are actually taking this sort of stuff very seriously.
Good. All right. Thanks, Vadim.
To even dovetail on that one too, I mean, I like to talk to people when we start discussing what their sensitive information looks like, or overall their collaboration environment. There's two major pillars to really take a look at, right? There's visibility, and B, that there's control. And I love the conversation you're having around focusing on not necessarily sharing out the sensitivity of the information right there, but the statistics associated with that information to go ahead and make sure that it's as secure as possible. But having that sort of visibility into really where this kind of information is going to lie and what type of information is out there is extremely paramount to making any sort of decisions going forward as an organization for what internal governance plans look like, or even so simple as internal sharing of information or external sharing of information that may be part of, but slightly independent from what the IT governance plan might actually look like. Extremely important to have a visibility into what that kind of content actually looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, that insight. All right. So the quick caveat: we're not attorneys here. At least I'm not. So I'm not going to give any legal advice. I'm not a security officer. More of a technician. But just something to be aware of. We're setting the stage for where we are legally in this country. Everybody here is probably familiar with GDPR and the changes that are going on, over in Europe. And I know some of the guys on the phone definitely have some knowledge about that. But the point is that sort of the wind is shifting towards data protection, and it's important to understand that we're moving in the direction, based on what we've been seeing in the marketplace, that people's private information belongs to them and not to the company that's holding onto it. And there will be more movements in this direction, and more teeth will be in place, and there will be more compliance and requirements legally for all of us to manage that data sort of appropriately and have the right compliance policies in place. So I think it's important to sort of think about that, know what your local regulations are, because your state is maybe generally more stringent than the federal government in terms of people's private information. Like Massachusetts does have its own laws as it relates to private information. So keep that in mind as well. And guys, you got anything to add to this?
Yeah, actually, I'll dovetail, especially onto that GDPR piece and how that integrates with all these different procedures and regulatory plans and needs that are out there right now. GDPR is great, and I hope everybody on the phone has heard of it right now, but it effectively goes ahead European citizens an understanding of what their personally identifiable information actually looks like, and effectively how that information is controlled from a variety of different organizations that they break down into a few different categories. Not too important over there. But what's important is that there's a set of articles and regulations associated with this that require any organization that is retaining information associated with European Union citizens, and that includes United States-based organizations, to go ahead and follow these rules, or at the risk of significant fines. These fines can be up to sometimes 4% of what your gross product actually is, your annual turnover is as an organization, right? And so for very small organizations, that's not as much, but they do have an upper dollar amount cap to go ahead and compare to that. But for very large organizations, that can be extremely impactful, right? It's a fine for just not following the rules for GDPR compliance. That makes it extremely relevant to be able to identify where personal information is in your environment, especially where that personal information actually is in regards to European citizens. But that is just the EU. that the beginnings of this that happened back in 2016 immediately sparked a fire across the globe. People were interested in what was going on and the steps that the European Union was taking to go and ensure that they were protecting the data of its citizens. I would not be surprised if we see further capabilities coming down the road from the United States or from other countries out there that are very in line with what GDPR is bringing to the table right now. But keep in mind, there's more than just GDPR that's compliant. For instance, we have actually written on the slide here, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA. Now, HIPAA compliance, you may find that you have personally identifiable information, PII, that's relevant to a European Union citizen, but it's also relevant to HIPAA compliance. So where do you actually stand? Now, fun fact, in most scenarios, HIPAA compliance actually overrules GDPR, but that's just one example. There are so many different forms of regulatory compliance out there that might be relevant for you from a collaboration point of view, or might be relevant for you for any sort of regulatory needs that you have internally. It becomes extremely important to understand which regulatory compliance need your organization is actually subject to within the content that you have. And then once you've identified that and figured out how they roll into each other, then you can start talking, as we get into more in this presentation, on what you can do to make sure that you're managing the content that falls within those acts.
Awesome. Well done. And I'm impressed. I've never heard anybody get the term fun fact in with HIPAA and GDPR in the same sentence. So well done.
Oh my goodness, fun has to be added with both of those.
Yeah, most people don't consider this stuff fun. All right. All right. So, just a real quick run through here. Just something to be aware of. This stuff always kind of, makes me shudder and laugh at the same time. And we'll apply differently to different organizations, but take a quick look here and look at different ways that data can escape your system, right? There's the unintentional, which is I would say a lot of times how it happens. It is difficult to prevent malicious intent, right? Because that's a tough one, but you definitely can, through training and some policies, procedures, and technology, really scale down the unintentional. So take a look here. I mean, I was reading just last week about somebody who went through somebody's dumpsters, and they had left a bunch of both paperwork and computers out there, and somebody went through it and found a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, just things like that, right? And we're not really going to cover that here because we're kind of on the technology end, but it should be part of your overall thought process.
Yeah, at Nintex, we've actually had fairly kind of regular emails coming in from our IT team, just reminding everybody that there are certain, email phishing scams going on, especially some internal people receiving some emails that, these days are starting to look really legit, because everything's there. The logos are there, the text is there. The English is a lot better than it used to be. Sometimes, so you can tell when there's huge grammar and spelling mistakes that it looks pretty fishy. But now we're starting to see some pretty elaborate phishing scams going on, especially through email. So it's good to see that people are seeing those, letting everybody know that those are around, because those are really easy to start. Click on a link, log into something, all of a sudden you're giving up your private information to people.
Yeah, that's another.
We actually saw the exact same thing that came up. Well, we get that from our IT team as well, but we saw one that came in last week that was, to be candid, phenomenal. I saw it and I thought first thing, boy, this looks right. I think I'm going to click here and reset my password. And I had to think for a minute and say, boy, that doesn't sound right. Why am I clicking a link in my email to do this? And then drilling into it a little bit further, you can see it was just a very professionally done phishing scam. I mean, these can really go significantly above and beyond what you would traditionally expect for what you're actually looking at from the old phishing scams, where it would be a crazy email address, it would be a crazy typos, as you were saying, but nowadays they're coming through very professionally done, not just in the content, but even spoofing the different email addresses that they've been working with.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of these
spell checkers are just ruining our lives.
Right. Making the hackers rich. All right. Thanks, guys. Okay. All right. So, this is where we start shifting gears from sort of the initial statistics and stuff, and sort of talking about the higher level points to start giving you guys some questions to start thinking about, and some things that really will impact you and your thought process as you work through this. And look at these questions, and you can use it to start narrowing down some of the actions you can take. And almost every time we ask these questions and the customers go do their homework, they definitely have some surprises that they come up with to them, surprises to them. Like they were shocked to see that there were certain holes in certain practices and activities that they didn't expect. So it is a good idea. That's where the diligence part comes in. Ryan or Vadim?
Yeah, actually, I've got a perfect one for here. Now, this is something that is coming up more and more, and especially with the current climate, where you'll see a lot of information out there around harassment and things like that in different across different industries. I don't think it yes just sits in one particular industry. It expands everything. Everybody needs to kind of feel comfortable in their workplace. You know, things that I've started to see more and more of our customers ask us about is, how do we go about, especially in our, say an example, in our Office 365 environment, how do we go about building out a particular process where we want our employees to feel comfortable about submitting some information to, say, human resources? Maybe it's a harassment claim, maybe it's just a question, but they want it to be something that's logged, something that's official, right? So they want to be able to have maybe a form that somebody fills in, but the data that they submit, they want that to be secure, right? They don't want to feel like somebody else is going to be able to see it and then they'll be made fun of, or ridiculed. They don't want somebody else to see it and then there'll be some sort of retribution around that. They want to feel secure and safe in submitting information like that, and then the appropriate, channels get notified of it and the appropriate processes are in place. So I'm getting a lot more questions around that sort of functionality. So I know that a lot of what we've been talking about is securing customer information, but I feel like, from an IT standpoint, from just a corporate standpoint, your customers are also your employees, and you want to make sure that their information is secure and safe, and they just feel comfortable with, discussing that sort of information. Sometimes, face-to-face discussions are not, are not good, not great, because they don't feel comfortable, with that sort of situation. So they have, something has occurred to them. They want to fill in the information. They want that to be secure. So having those processes in place that takes that data, that secures it in such a way that only they can see it, and only, say, one or a particular person inside HR can see it, that's really important. So I'm starting to see more and more of that, especially these days. So make sure you guys, keep an eye on that sort of stuff, because you want to make sure that you provide a safe working environment.
I'll say, Vadim, I love the fact you brought up HR as an example right here, because if anybody on this line has listened to me talk about security and SharePoint and Office 365, you've probably heard me tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyways. And it's a great HR story that relates almost directly to the slide right here. So we had a customer that we were working with at Metalogix, and we offered product that would go ahead and would actually cover a lot of these different bullet points here, right? Policies and procedures, knowing who's accessing content, etc. So that was in place. And we had this HR department within an organization. And keep in mind, this is not size specific, this story related, right? It's not vertical specific. Everybody has an HR environment. But because this organization didn't have a lot of training internally for the employees on what they were doing within SharePoint, didn't have a lot of training for what certain actions meant, what certain buttons meant, or realistically, even a lot of training on what their internal governance policies looked like, somebody who just happened to have some rights within the HR site wandered around, found the public site that had people's, public information on holidays, that sort of thing, and then a lovely document library out there that said, hey, this is for HR members only. This contains everybody's offer letter. Well, boy, they didn't know what that button said that said start inheriting permissions. And they clicked that button, and all of a sudden the entire company saw every single person's offer letter. That becomes a huge problem when you can have a breach of information like that simply due to a lack of training. All of the policies, all of the procedures, everything that you can put on paper doesn't really matter if you can't train your people out to make sure that these kinds of accidents don't specifically happen.
Absolutely, thanks. And as we get to the sort of the pillars, and we'll go through the 6 of them in just a moment, that training is one of them. So thanks for teeing that up. All right, Ryan, you want to set this one up?
Yeah, I told you guys I was going to revisit this. So to revisit the Ponemon study, right? Not just having a conversation about whether or not people feel like they're actually in place from a tool and an implementation and a governance perspective internally to manage and watch their content. But when they surveyed these same organizations, you can see right here in nice big numbers, 70% of those organizations believed that if they had a data breach involving the loss or theft of confidential information, their ability to detect would be minimal or non-existent. And I want to repeat that because that's extremely important right now. 70% said it would be minimal or non-existent within the context of SharePoint. The part that makes that even worse is SharePoint, out of the box gives you these capabilities, right? You have the option to at least, well, let me back that up. The ability to see who's been touching what where, provided you know what you're doing and you know where to look for this kind of information. And Microsoft has made it easier and easier and easier over time. But there are still challenges out there, right? And the biggest challenges come down to an understanding and a knowledge of the platform to be prepared for these types of capabilities, these types of actions that might take place. And it's also very important to be prepared and be aware of what you can do as a proactive capability to keep an eye on what this content looks like and what people's behavior within this content actually looks like as well.
Yeah, this one shocked me too. There's a lot of out-of-the-box technology in Office 365 to prevent the vast majority of this statistic right here, which is know when the data comes in or comes out. This one always gives me the chills when I see it, because that could be my data from some other company. And with that, we're going to do something fancy, and we're going to ask the audience, could you detect a breach? Hopefully you guys should see the poll. Let us know. It's anonymous, so nobody's going to get judged on this.
I think I should be allowed to respond.
We are not allowed to respond.
Yeah, we can't skew the results.
Hey, when we first started using Office 365, our answer would have been no. And I have a little anecdote to discuss later on about how actually implementing it saved, not an actual breach, but a potential one.
I think that would be the answer for everybody, though. Everybody who kind of tackles SharePoint, whether they're on-prem and moving to 365 or they're born in the cloud, I think if you look at SharePoint, it's a big beast. There's a lot of moving parts to it.
Absolutely.
So
it's a great platform, but at the risk of sounding negative about it, it's a terrifying platform. It has so many cool things that you can do in there, but that means that there's so many cool and interesting areas that you have to keep an eye on, right? That you need to make sure you have your plans around, and you need to make sure that you have some sort of coverage over at any given time.
Yep. All right. So we got a bunch of responders. It seems to have leveled off, so I'm going to close it up and not. Oh well. I don't know if you guys can see it already, but do you guys have a guess? You guys could probably see it.
I can't see it, but I'm going to guess that most people say they wouldn't be able to detect a breach.
All right, 86% said no, they would not be able to detect a breach of the audience polled here. Well, I guess that's probably why these people are on the webinar. So that means we should move forward to start giving them some of the steps, don't you guys think?
Ooh. Great idea.
Oh, hold on. I don't know what happened. There we go. All right. Make sure the presentation is back. Is it back?
It is back.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. I'm not exactly a go-to-webinar expert. Okay. So here's where the rubber starts hitting the road, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. So really, we're just going to talk about 6 steps in as much detail as we reasonably can in the amount of time we have. And just so you guys know, this is a primer. We're going to go into some of the details later, and so I encourage you to answer the survey afterwards. Respond to us with, "Hey, I want to hear more about X," or "I want to hear more about Y," and we're going to do more webinar series with people other than necessarily just ourselves, maybe some people that have expertise in some of the specifics. So please, your feedback is what it's all about. And so afterwards, let us know what you want to hear more about. And we're just going to try to prime the pump here. Real high level, we're going to get into each one of these in detail, but it's really a process of gathering up the people and getting the right group in order. Then making sure you understand what you have already, what's there. Know what policies you need in place based on what you have and what you want to let people do within your risk tolerance, and then you have to set up the controls to create that structure, right? Permissions and management and all sorts of good technology bits. But the part that a lot of people leave out is training. We're going to talk quite a bit about training, some philosophies there, some things we've seen work, and then the back end of it, which a lot of people fall out of too. A lot of people Field of Dreams, this whole concept. They build it, they set it all up, they put these policies, they make people read them and sign off on them, and then they say, yeah, we're good. It's not really how it works. If there's a potential breach, you got to know what you're going to do. Not only detect it, but then have a plan. Right, have a plan to go look at it, because most of them are false positives. Right, it wasn't a real breach. It was legit, but I need to make sure that I've gone and checked, because if it wasn't, I need to be able to do something about it. All right. So first and foremost, This is kind of near and dear to my heart, is the governance and vision angle of a lot of what we do, because it sets the stage, it gets the right people in the room, and those people are paramount to the success of any endeavor. If it's a IT only exercise, in many cases it's tough to get the right people caring about what you're trying to get done until you usually have a breach or you have some major problem, and then people care. But you know, the smart people are trying to get ahead of it. So really, it's about getting the right folks on board. And you know, it depends on your organization, depending on what your needs are, right? This isn't just necessarily private information. There's also intellectual property and financial information, and maybe you are the healthcare based company, you have HIPAA policies or procedures too. So you know, if you have a security officer, that's obviously great. If you don't, you know, that's where you know, we partner with some people to bring some in to kind of work with you on what you should be doing based on your legal compliance. You want to look at HR. You definitely want to have IT involved because they're going to be the technology gates. If you have a training staff, you got to make sure that they're on board and maybe adjust their style appropriately. So get the right team involved early so they know what's coming instead of just they get it shoved at them later. So you're trying to build that consensus early on. And once you have that team together, the right people will start to be able to form your risk assessment, right? Which is, what do we have, and which is the risky data, which is not the risky data. And you know, I give the one example is, you know, if you're Coca-Cola, well, the formula to Coke is super, super important. I don't sell soda, so I really could care less if I had a formula to something. So that's not important to me, but it's important to them. So you know, everybody's data is different. People's private information tends to kind of be a common denominator. So that's why it's somewhat easier to look for. But as you're doing it, you might as well look across the board for your sort of data structures and your data types. You guys have anything to add to this before I move on?
Yeah, I'll add some of the stuff that I've been seeing around this over the last 10 years or so, and that is, you know, there's a lot of questions I get around what kind of governance do you have around, you know, just around the Nintex tools, and then also, you know, what can you do around governance inside of SharePoint. Where people don't ask that question, I make sure to at least bring up the governance part, because I think it's more important to bring it up at the early stages of the discussion than it is to find out later on, you know, oh wow, I have access to some actions that, you know, say to do with Active Directory, and all of a sudden I've somehow given my employees the ability to query Active Directory and pull out all the personal information for all their employees. You know, so, you know, I want to make sure that people are, you know, when they get in, especially at the early stages, to know about, you know, potential risks, how to mitigate those, you know, what kind of governance is in place that you can control. And as Ryan mentioned, training is a big part of that. You know, it's not just a matter of, you know, there's stuff inside whatever tool that you use, you know, around governance and being able to control it. But if you're not aware of that, if you haven't been trained up in knowing that you can actually implement some of these policies and put in place some of these policies and some of these rules, then, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of governance there is in tools. If you're not going to use them, if you don't know anything about them, then, you know, you're at risk. So training is a massive part of it, and, you know, ask those questions. You know, if you're going to use a tool, what kind of governance is in place to protect, you know, our customer data, protect our internal staff information, you know, our IP, you know, all that sort of stuff is really important. So make sure that you talk about that early on. I try to do that in all my discussions.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
You know, so often somebody goes into IT and says, IT, we want to make sure that our content is secure. Just go do it, right? And then they walk away, and that's the entire initiative that goes. I cannot stress enough, we are talking on this right here, to actually understand what your and then also putting together what your plan from a big early stage. It's not a technology piece, it's a business piece. It should involve as many people as possible to the business possible. They're going to say, especially IT, we say especially legal, and Ryan mentioned HR. These are all different groups in different parts of the organization that can weigh in on what should be considered sensitive, what should be considered confidential, to manage that going forward. These should what our technology is that we currently have on our plates. These should be, this is my desired end goal. And then the conversations can continue about what technology or what services can be engaged to make sure that those end goals actually come up appropriately.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Brian, you're breaking up just a little bit. I don't know if it's your new headset or what, but we got most of it. But there was a little bit of packet loss.
Oh no,
no, it's all right.
Terrible.
I think, and hopefully it wasn't. Hopefully maybe it's just me instead of everybody. All right, cool. Thank you guys. All right, so yeah, I mean that's for the people that get the mandate. Hey, go make this secure. That's hopefully those are the people that we can help talk to here, right? Like, okay, so you've been given the mandate. Here's how you got started. All right, so next is, okay, what do you have? Where is it? Who has access to it? This is where you need to go start to dive into your data and try to figure out, hey, do I have private information in here? Has someone stuck it in here? Do I know about it? Do I not know about it? And I know personally, because we kind of have to eat our own dog food, as we call it. We have a process in place with a secure area where we store employee information, and very, very careful about who has access to it. I don't have access to it, and make sure that we have very strict DLP policies about any of that type of data moving in and out. And I can tell you that it works, because I get notified if something moves in and out of the system. So it's definitely important. But definitely I want to hand this off to Mr. Tully, because I know he has a lot of experience handling the shortcomings you get out of Office 365, which is, how do I handle data at rest?
Oh, goodness gracious. So the Office 365 is a great platform, and what Microsoft brings to the table with their DLP system is a fantastic system as well. Do not get me wrong. The end point, though, is on this is the DLP system, while very useful, very helpful, doesn't always meet the needs for everybody. There's more that you're looking for than just basic. This is PHI, this is PII, this is PCI, or financial information. There's also different ways to focus on what's considered regulatory compliant. Right? How do I actually make this look at what's going on within my organization today? Now, as I mentioned on the previous one, that's a business problem that we had on our last slide, right? Sitting back and identifying what you need to care, what your end goal, what your vision of good really looks like over at Target. This one can be a technology problem, right? Now, you've understood what you've considered an actual issue, right? What you've considered for sensitive information or confidential information, but now you need to figure it out. What do you actually have in Office 365, or what do you have in your other collaboration platforms right now that you need to sit back and say, this is where my sensitive information is, and how am I going to make this conform to my policies? I need to see who can access this content and how we can manage that content. And again, Office 365 is a great platform. If I wanted to sit down and I wanted to use their DLP scan to go through and identify information in certain site collections, I can set that up and do it. I can identify security in certain site collections and do that too. Some of those actions can be a bit time consuming, however, and they can be a little bit not targeted to what the specific requirements of the request of the organization are. So this is one of those areas that either engaging an organization that can provide some sort of product solution to kind of fill in these gaps, or engaging with a consulting organization that can provide a service solution to fill in these gaps, really becomes significantly viable and significantly important to make sure that you do have that technology solution that aligns to what your business solution was that you came up with in our previous slide.
Yeah, great, thanks. And my biggest takeaway on this is that Office 365 does a pretty good job once you've defined your sort of data governance and DLP policies and alerts. When data moves around, moves in and out, but it doesn't do a good job at all of doing a scan for what you have in there now. So you could have a ticking time bomb waiting in there, and you don't know where it is or who has access to it, because it's not able to go scan the data that's living there. And so that's critical to sort of understanding what we have here now, so you know what you need to move to more secure locations. Great. Okay, so this makes sense to most people probably. Once you figured out what you have and you've kind of looked at your existing policies, if you have any, and procedures, then you got to start figuring out, okay, what is it that we are supposed to be doing, right? And this isn't really a technology exercise. This is a data governance exercise and a security exercise. And this is where you start figuring out what you can actually enforce, right? I've come across some policies and procedures and doing a lot of governance activities with people, and they're not enforceable. And so the rule of thumb is if you can't make sure that it actually happens, then the policy is kind of worthless, because people will just work around it or ignore it. And even if you have a 30-page, pie in the sky written information security policy, boil it down to something manageable, understandable, and that people will get when they read it, when you ask them to read it.
Yeah, I would say,
yeah, go ahead.
In some of the companies that I've worked at in the past, there's definitely been policies in place for what people can have access to, but there would be a situation where I would ask for something and somebody would say, well, you know what, look, I'm really too busy at the moment. I just don't have the ability to kind of walk you through something and show, talk about it. But here, let me just give you access to this. and all of a sudden I now have access to things that I probably shouldn't have access to. And the worst situation that you could encounter in something like that is when somebody goes, especially in like an Office 365 environment, might say, oh, you know what, you need to look at something like this, let me just give you access to that. And instead of giving you access to maybe that particular document, they give you access to the list or to the site or the site collection or something like that. And all of a sudden, you now have access to things that you should definitely not have access to. You might have access to, personal information. You might have access to how much people are getting paid. And all of a sudden, that causes a bunch of issues. So definitely you want to put policies in place, but exactly like what you said, Ryan, it's not just a matter of putting together a massive, policy document. You need to make sure that there is a digestible, small dot point, format that people can understand, and also regular to go through that, because as people have companies that grow, people come in and out of positions, come in and out of the company. You need to make sure that people are on top of this and aware of these policies, so that they don't do silly things like that. It's too much of a risk.
Great. No, I agree. It's which role should have access to which data, and can we govern those locations? I'm with you. Thank you. Okay. So sort of once you've figured out your policies, figure out what you have, and you know that you can enforce them, and you've determined who needs to do what. Now you need to probably do some reshuffling, right? And I know that out of the gate, Office 365 is pretty good at letting you sort of define permissions, set up data structures. But what's going to happen is you're going to figure out that, well, I have a bunch of permissions here that I've had to go look at manually, unless I use third-party tools. And I now need to move these large chunks of data from one place to another. And how do I do that? And then how do I make sure that I'm monitoring permissions? O365 has good auditing capabilities, but not necessarily great widespread permission management capabilities, right? It's pretty granular or manual, and so it's something to consider, that it's not necessarily an easy individual user process to do that with a human being. So I definitely thought, Ryan, you might want to talk a little bit about this with your experience.
I'd say from a usability point of view, the greatest feature that Microsoft ever introduced into SharePoint is that share link that you have out there. From a security point of view, the worst thing Microsoft has ever done was introduce that share link that you can put on a particular file. Because as soon as you start going through that, you have no idea who is sharing what where. Now, maybe we have some policy at the very, very top level in O365 that there's no external users, you can't share it out of the organization, and that's cool. But then that starts running into the conversation that a lot of people run into, which is, hey, my IT platforms that we're spending money on as an organization are just not meeting the needs that we happen to have for they're not meeting the actual needs that we happen to have within my section of the organization. For instance, say marketing needs to engage with third-party consultants to go and share information out and receive information in. All of a sudden, go hog wild within the environment. So it's great. It's very usable. It makes it very hard to audit and keep an eye on what some of the information looks like. And that tends to be some of the worst problems that we run into. Or especially if you're not going to Office 365 as a greenfield environment. If you're coming from an on-premise environment and you're migrating into Office 365, which is the most common scenario that we run into on our side at least, is if you had problems in the source environment, especially if you had security issues, if it was the wild, wild west for how they manage your security out there, those issues then become mirrored over into your Office 365 environment, and now you know that your actual setting of your permissions and what the structure looks like on those permissions, they're problems, right? So making sure that you go through and you manage how they look like in Office 365 becomes paramount. And to your point, Ryan, there are third-party tools out there that absolutely do that. The out-of-the-box capability is a little bit rough in regards to security, because the goal is, don't get me wrong, security is important, right? But the goal is also to make sure that you're collaborating and sharing information across the board, right, at all times. So it's an interesting balance between usability and security as you go back and forth, a little bit of a seesaw effect, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And yeah, I mean, this is really the technology step, right? Once you've kind of defined the people and the process and the policies, now you adjust the technology to match those policies, right? I mean, it's not rocket science, but it does take some diligence. And appreciate your insight on that. Okay, next one. I love this one. Training. And the reason why I love training is because I've been using SharePoint for a long time, and I've run into that I hate it and the I love it, and a lot of people hate it for legitimate reasons, but a lot of those reasons are around sort of a lack of understanding of what it can do for them, or they were sold a bill of goods and handed the blank slate, and frankly they don't know how to make it work for them. Some people figure it out, some people know it already. So training is a user adoption play, and in this particular case, training is to adopt users to ensure that they're protecting your data according to policies. Don't just rely on technical implementations. And so I have some things that have worked for us in the kind of that center of excellence for Office 365 cadence that we provide our customers. How we do training has started to work really, really well, and it's really short and repeated instructor-led training, kind of directly with small groups of the customer base. So not necessarily online learning management system, hey, check this box or answer this question after you watched a video. That is not necessarily engage a user. You want to be looking at them, you want to allow them to ask questions, you want to ask them questions, especially with the really, really important the data protection stuff. And as part of this, you're going to communicate with these people the consequences of sort of careless file usage, and not just to the company, but potentially to the employee, right? I mean, there are consequences to letting people's private information slip out, and people want to be aware of that. And I think most people are good people, and they just want to know what to do and want to know how to do it correctly, instead of just kind of guesstimate. And if they ask a question, they want to be able to get somebody to respond to it. If not, they just kind of do it whatever way they know how. So being responsive and being proactive are huge. And it's also really important that the training curriculum, the people that offer the training, are in lockstep with the people that are managing the policies and the administrators that are enforcing those policies on the technology, because the policies will change, laws will change, technology will change, and the training needs to change. And it can't just be train them once, one time, let it go, and you say that you did it, right? You have to have onboarding training. You have to do it regularly. When something does change, you have to make sure the training people are aware. They update the materials. They send out invites and schedule and say, hey, look, the WISP has changed. Our written information security policy has changed. Our social media policy has changed because we're releasing Microsoft Teams, and we're going to allow external users to use it, and we're going to be putting certain data in there. And it's important that for you to use these systems, you have to take this updated training. So it's really important to us that we kind of get the customers thinking about that. So obviously I'm a fast talker, and I'm passionate about this particular subject. So it's just, to me, it's just critical to let the users know and help them, enable them to do the right thing.
Ryan, I got to say, I love your passion about training right now. And as I made my story earlier, training was what broke that person's environment and their security policy internally. So I think that any big focus on training is enormous. I do want to take one moment here, guys. We're getting closer to the end of the webinar. I want to point out that we do have our questions pane. We've gotten a lot of really good questions so far that have already come in, but we want to make sure that for those of you who didn't notice it so far in the webinar, feel free to open it up and start throwing in your questions too, and we'll time at the end to answer the best questions that we've received, or at least the most compelling, to make sure that we can get that kind of information included in the webinar for you too.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. All right. Yeah, we are. This is the last of the steps slide. And this one's also extremely important too. This is the field of dreams comment I made earlier, where a lot of people build a great governance policy, they set everything up, they kind of monitor, they train people, but then they really don't know how to look at it after the fact. They don't know how to create an incident management sort of structure or system, so that when the positives or mostly false positives occur, they can audit or track that they've done something. False positives are good. It means that you're detecting things happening. And I'll give you a recent anecdote from someone I know that sent an email. This email that their company had implemented relatively recently, that implemented some DLP policies around financial information, and this person was sending financial information out over email, and something that would have just happened totally normally, but instead Outlook, because it's connected to the back-end structure and the DLP process, stopped them and said, hey, look, I've detected financial information in this. It was a PDF. Do you want to send this? And they said yes. And it's kind of a two-pronged option. You can either say, this doesn't really contain financial information. It was a false hit, right? Which at least that's logged. Or they say, yes, but it has legitimate business value. And then they have to type in a reason why. So it stopped the user and stop and think about it. In this particular case, this user said, you know what? Okay, I get it. I probably was short-circuiting the system a little bit, it reminded me, and they used two-factor authentication and ended up, doing something else, essentially embedding it in a Word document, password protecting that, and calling the other side. So basically, making that a more secure transaction than would have happened. And all that really happened was the policy just popped up and warned them. It didn't prevent them, but it warned them and made them stop and think about it. And that's a true story.
That's a great, right? That's all about the proactivity around this information. And I don't want to spend too much time on that because, again, I want to make sure we have time to answer some questions here. But realistically, there needs to be some level of proactivity around what the sensitive information is out there, but also understanding when users in the environment are performing actions that do not comply with whatever your governance policies are. Whether this involves going through and looking at what your audit reports are on a daily basis, or you have some sort of tool to automate that, et cetera. It's all about proactivity around what this content looks like and what actions are being taken around this content to ensure that the environment's as secure as possible.
Yeah, great. And this is one of the reasons why we partner a lot with Nintex, because the incident management system is great to use their tools to collect data, to build workflows, to understand what you had to do in the case of a potential incident, what you did, that it's recorded, and it's auditable, because that's what an auditing agency wants to see, is that you followed through.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone's incident management system is probably going to be a little bit different. Everyone's policies are going to be a little bit different. So it's a nice way to kind of customize exactly what you need. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. All right. So we will. I'll fire up this poll real quick. I managed to not update the poll. So if you only have a 0, please click the 1, and I'll just assume I was going to say 0 to 1. But how many of these policies of the 6 do you have in place? And as you guys are responding to that, we'll kind of kick right to the end and we'll do questions right after this. We'll skip the last couple slides. All right, polls are coming in.
I think Nintex has all the tools, all the steps in place. We have no security flaws ever.
Yeah.
Not once ever, right?
Not once ever. Yeah.
All right, we got almost half the people voted. Anybody who hasn't voted, if you want to sort of throw in? Okay, as it's starting to close out, we have about half that are at the 0 to 1, 40% at 2. And then the rest sort of sprinkled out under the 4. Okay. All right. I mean, that's not abnormal. Not abnormal at all. People that are new to Office 365, a lot of these tools are new, frankly, as well. So, it's hard to blame people. But just good to find out. Okay. All right. I'm going to close up the poll, and we'll skip to the end to the questions. We did have some questions. Okay, so getting started, we can follow up with anybody afterwards. It's all about sort of the mental process, how you build your plan. It's really it's mostly a recap. So I'm happy to share this deck with people afterwards. Okay, let's see some questions. Some questions came in a little bit earlier. They may have been answered. Let's see. I'll run through. All right, how much of what we discussed today can you implement with out-of-the-box tools in Office 365? We need to know what's there versus what we need to add on. Okay, we covered some of this, but the real highlights are O365 is good at some stuff. It's good at DLP, security, a lot of the transactional data moving in and out. And I know that Ryan and the tool set that Metalogix supports is great for the scanning data at rest and the permissions management and the moving data around in larger chunks, things that are really difficult to do with out-of-the-box tools. Ryan, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, that's a very high-level overview of what it is, right? I mean, we do have a tool set that will help you identify the sensitive information above and beyond what you can get from the out-of-the-box capabilities, with a high level of customization based on what you find as valid and relevant information, including relevant information in proximity to each other, which is great. And then actually seeing what your security models look like, controlling your security models, controlling your audits plan, and even identifying when users are touching that information when they shouldn't have, or rather, not just when they shouldn't have, but when it's outside of what their normal capabilities and utilization of that content actually looks like, and then reorganizing it so it fits into different areas based on sensitivity of what that information looks like. So we offer a lot that goes above and beyond what out of the box is. Do not get me wrong, I don't want to disparage what Microsoft does offer out of the box, because Microsoft always offers fantastic solutions to the different organizations out there. But it's one of the downsides of being a very large organization with a lot of products is you can't be everything for everyone. And there's always a lot of gaps that need to be filled in. And we do bring to the table ourselves, and Nintex bring to the table different solutions that can help fill in those gaps in different ways.
All right, great. And so kind of a lead in is the next question, which is, how are we managing incidents? Someone pointed out that Office 365 is it doesn't have any incident management built into it. It's kind of a, hey, I'll warn you that something happened via an email and via the security center, but what is the incident management structure? And so I thought maybe Vadim could take that one, because that's a good sort of opportunity for Nintex.
Yeah, it seems to be a common kind of scenario that people want to implement, because just out of the box, SharePoint Office 365, you can capture information into a list, but then what do you do after that? The idea behind kind of what you can do with something like a business process automation tool like Nintex is that you can capture when somebody fills in that request. You can secure it to make sure that other people aren't aware that that was submitted. You can go through a particular process, go through approvals and get more information, and then escalations and all that sort of stuff, and you can control it over time. And then finally, have some sort of tool at the end to actually get some reporting around it. How many instances were submitted, how many were closed, how many were open. Now that's if you do everything inside Office 365. Alternatively, there are other incident systems that you might want to, or case management systems that you might want to interact with from the Office 365 environment as well. So there's a lot in putting together this. You can start very small, gathering some information, and
Yep, I'm getting a lot of breaking up. I hope part of me hopes that's me. All right, we have time for one more question. Hopefully everybody's still there. So we have a tool, Spirion, to identify PII. Oh. My audio connection has been lost. Is everybody still there? Can anybody hear me?
He just kicked off. So yes, the question was to Spirit, just to
in the environment and what your DLP solution should look like. And specifically, I think that you should have some sort of solution out there that is focused very specifically on the type of information that it is that you are looking for, that you define as either personally identifiable information or it's protected health information, private health information, et cetera, right? If you're looking at PCI, whatever that looks like, but also a level of customization, because if it isn't bringing to the table exactly what it is that you're looking for, you need to be able to tell your system what it is that I am looking for identification. Otherwise, you're just going to have gaps in your story entirely. And then the worst part comes down to is if I've understood where that type of sensitivity is in my environment from a PII, PHI, PCI perspective, I need to be able to do something about it. Right? What good is it? No, don't get me wrong. I love information, right? Knowing is half the battle. But what good is information if you can't do anything with it? Right? If you just sit back and say, fantastic, that's sensitive, shrug my shoulders and move on. It's really relevant to make sure that you have a complete solution that will be sure to identify the information for you and then allow you to do something with that, whether it's some level of downstream action, or it's a report, or it's relocation of content, or it's alerting, or whatever it happens to be.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I guess that was me having a little connection issue here, so I apologize for that, everybody. Thank you. All right, well, I really appreciate everybody joining today, and like I said, there is a survey at the end. I think it only has 3 questions, and they're open-ended on top of what did you think of the webinar. But really, what we're looking for is for you to tell us what else you'd like to know. Obviously, this is a primer, and we want to do some more of these. So, what's the big troubling area for you? We don't know. It's a big area, so get back to us. Let us know, and the next series will be maybe a little bit more specific on some activities that we can dive into. But anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If anybody would like a copy of the deck, let us know. Or if they have any follow-up questions, obviously you know how to reach us. I really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, and thank you guys. Thank you, Vadim. Thank you, Ryan. That was great. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Vadim.
Yeah, thank you both, Ryans. Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.